Hi, everyone. I'm Carly.
And I'm Sophia.
And this is Away She Goes, a podcast from her adventures.
Each episode will help you feed your wanderlust with travel tips, stories, inspiration, and more.
Away she goes. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Away She Goes. Today, Sophia and I are joined by a very special guest, Captain Tom. Captain Tom is an airline pilot. He also is a licensed clinical social worker, LCSW, and he works with people on treating their fear of flying. So welcome to the show, Captain Tom. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
So before we get into our episode, would you mind just giving our listeners a little bit of background about yourself, kind of what your career as a pilot has looked like and how you came into this role and how you now do what you do to help others with a fear of flying?
Well, to begin with, I flew with the Air Force, flew the F-100, which was the first series produced supersonic fighter. Very dangerous airplane. 1 out of 3 of them crashed. So you learn a little bit about risk with flying that airplane. Then after 7 years, I went with the airlines, flew with Pan Am for about 20 years, and then 10 years with United Airlines. At Pan Am, one of our pilots had a course on fear of flying, and he asked me if I would volunteer to assist him on the program. And I said, Slim Cummings was the guy who ran it. I said, Slim, I don't really want to be around a bunch of crazy people. He said, no, you'll be surprised. Come take a look. And so I went, and I was surprised. It seemed everyone there was very bright and very imaginative. I think it takes a good bit of intelligence to think of 1,000 things that can go wrong. And it takes good imagination, very vivid imagination, to make every one of them seem like it's about to happen. So that's how I got hooked on helping people deal with this flying.
I've been told that the word that was used to describe it was catastrophize. Not with flying. I don't do it with flying, but with other things. Mm-hmm. I'm like that. I imagine 1,000 ways that something's going to go wrong. I imagine in very vivid detail what's going to happen when it goes wrong. Not with flying, luckily, but with everything else. So I understand that from that perspective, of course. So you now have a website and programs that you run to help people conquer the fear of flying. So
yes, originally we did courses live around the US, 3-day courses. Then Parade Magazine did a feature on us. It's a magazine that's a supplement for small town newspapers. So we got 6,000 letters, and they were all from little towns where we couldn't hope to put on a course, couldn't get enough people together. So I put together a correspondence course kind of thing, a home study course. And the thing that amazed me is that people doing that got better results than the people we were seeing in person. So then I started fine-tuning that program, and then in 2005 turned it into video. And so now what we have is actually 3 courses from about 3 hours long to about 9 hours long. They all include a counseling session, because one of the key features is an exercise that the person uses to train their mind to not have problems with the feelings when they fly.
What would a typical program look like? You know, what in summary, like what kind of things do you address? What kind of topics does it cover? You know, if I were to sign up and take a program, what is like an umbrella view of like what I would experience during that program?
Well, there's one of the things that needs to happen is you need to be not just statistically told that flying is safe. You've got to actually know the ins and outs yourself. You need to know how flying works, so that intellectually, at least, you're satisfied that flying, though not perfectly safe, is safe enough to do. It's safer than most things we do, but it may not feel safe because we're not in control. And the second thing is, after you are okay with the idea of getting on the plane intellectually, what do we do emotionally? We have to then train the mind to not react so much to the things that happen on the plane. And what you said about catastrophizing, I think, is worth going into a little bit here. There's a well-known psychoanalyst in the UK, Peter Fonagy, who has a concept called psychic equivalence. He says for the first 3 years of life, a child makes no distinction between what's real and what's imaginary. They have no way to know that what's in their mind isn't real. But at around age 3, we begin to realize that something could be in our mind that doesn't exist out there, and vice versa. So what he says happens is that you could have let's say a 4-year-old kid and a 2-year-old kid playing together. And the 4-year-old says, oh, there's lions and tigers. They're going to chase us and eat us. Run. Well, the 4-year-old kid can have fun with that because he knows it's imagination. The 2-year-old kid also put those lions and tigers in his mind, but he doesn't know he did. So he thinks they're real and starts getting upset, trying to find mom to save him from getting eaten. Now, something similar to that happens when we start dealing with thoughts about getting on the airplane. When we have the thought that something could go wrong and we can't be in control of what happens to make sure it doesn't. And if it does go wrong, we can't get off the plane to save ourselves. That produces stress hormones. When we produce stress hormones, we lose the ability that Fonagy talks about to recognize that what's in our mind is imagination. Without being aware of it, we slide into being like the 2 or 3-year-old kid who has this thought that the plane is going to cause them to perish, like the imaginary lions and tigers. But we are not aware that this is imagination. And so it seems all too real. And we have the feeling, my God, if I get on the plane, I just know it's going to crash. Or if we're on the plane, perhaps in turbulence, and the feeling of the plane dropping feels like it's dropping. It's not really dropping, but it feels like it causes the amygdala to release stress hormones, which it does in any time it thinks that you're losing your balance or falling. So the stress hormones, because there's one bump after another, build up and cause us once again to lose track of the fact that what we're doing mentally is imaginary. And we actually experience, not correctly, but we actually experience the plane falling out of the sky. That's terrifying. And that's the main thing we deal with this program.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, really fascinating how that.
I never knew that was how it worked in someone's mind when this was happening.
Well, yes, you see, most pilots have the notion, pilots who run courses on fear of flying have the notion that if people just understand how safe it is, they'll be okay with it. But knowing how safe it is just the starting point. We actually have to deal with it emotionally as well as intellectually.
Right, because I'm sure there are still people who believe, as little as the chance is still there and it will happen to me. I will be that small percentage.
Exactly. And that's the thought that gets the stress hormones going. And then when the stress hormones cause us to lose the ability to distinguish imagination from something that's real, that imaginary thought that I'm going to be the person who perishes becomes your reality.
That's so interesting because with the lottery and playing the lottery, it's the other way around.
Exactly.
It's the same odds, but you don't think it's going to be you.
That's it.
So I'm not somebody who has a fear of flying or anything like that. But if I were to fly, or any of our listeners were to want to travel with a friend who maybe has a fear, what are some things that, oh yeah. Mm-hmm. What are some things that we can do just on like a personal kind of small time level to help our friends out, that we're flying with?
Okay. Well, a researcher named Stephen Porges has found that when we're with a person who is completely accepting of us, someone who, of course, isn't physically a danger to us, but that's fairly common. But what's not so common is a person who's not some kind of emotional threat. For example, we need a person who is not critical, not judgmental, and maybe even doesn't give advice, because giving advice kind of means that I am more at a level above you. So it needs to be someone who the whole idea of acceptance is a moot question. When we're with such a person, we let our guard down. And Porges says the reason we let our guard down is we unconsciously pick up signals from them that activate our calming system. It's called the parasympathetic nervous system. Para, the prefix to that word, it means against. We have the sympathetic nervous system. That's the one that revs us up. The parasympathetic nervous system works against that one. So when stress hormones are released, they activate the sympathetic nervous system. Our heart rate goes up, our breathing rate goes up. And because this could be a life-threatening emergency to some degree. The sympathetic nervous system reroutes the blood supply going to the digestive system, to the gut, to the muscles, so we can run faster. The idea is if we were, let's say, a few centuries ago, cave men and cave women walking around after having a big lunch, and we thought we heard a huge predator, a lion, stalking us, we might say, we got to run. Well, it's just fine if we shut down our digestive system, because if you're going to be lunch, what happens to the lunch you've already had doesn't matter too much. So that's what the sympathetic nervous system does. And it's, considering we've been around now for many centuries, it's pretty successful. But it's not caught up with the Wright brothers, and I don't know that it ever will, because now we're talking about being in a situation where we can't run, we can't fight, and yet we're supposed to be able to deal with it emotionally. So what we need to do is to activate the parasympathetic nervous system so that it can push back against that sympathetic nervous system trying to rev us up. And when we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, Porges tells us it's activated by these signals from a friend. Their face sends signals, their voice quality sends signals. What they say is not so important. It's not the words, it's the music. So what you can do when you're with a friend on a plane is just be there with them and not give them advice, not give them any encouragement, just be there with them so that your unconscious signals of acceptance come across, which activate the calming system for them. Now, that's approaching what we do with this exercise that we use in the program. We take a series of photographs from an actual flight, a couple of dozen of them, from boarding to taking the flight to getting off the plane. And one by one, we ask the person to pretend that their friend is holding that picture by their face. Now, the airplane photograph has some negative valence to it, but your friend's face is causing the parasympathetic nervous system to activate. So when you put that negative influencing image by the face overrides it. And in spite of the fact that there's negatives in that photograph, things that could activate the system that revs us up, the person's face overrides that. So we link the calming person's presence, their face and their voice, to each of the things they're going to run into on the plane. And once the person has done the exercise a few times, this connection is built in, so that when they get on the plane, instead of having the original influence attached to that situation take over, what calms them is the new thing we've added to that experience, the friend's face and voice. The thing that people are very surprised at is they may have anxiety as they approach the flight and see there's no way that it's going to be any different. They get on the plane and they reach a point they would expect to be freaking out, and nothing is happening because this process of calming is taking place completely unconsciously.
Sophia, what was your experience like with your friend, just out of curiosity?
It was actually not as bad as I expected, because I don't think I was ticking all the boxes that Tom just mentioned, but I'm quite happy that I did my best to just provide some comfort to my friend, just be like, let me know what you need, and that I didn't try to tell her any stats about how safe the plane is. And because really with most of our fears, or for example, if you're stressed, the least thing that helps is when someone tells you, well, it's irrational to be stressed now. It's not going to do you any good. Well, but yeah, I find it very interesting how you can rewire your brain like that with pictures.
Well, when I think about it, I'm of the opinion that we need to be wired that way very early in life, that when a young child is upset, the mother normally will present her face and her voice and even her touch. And those things calm the baby. So let's say technically we could say the child's sympathetic nervous system is getting activated, their heart rate goes up, breathing rate goes up, et cetera. All that body tension happens. But mom's face, she talks to the baby, she presents her face, and those things activate the calming system. So if this happens reliably enough, probably the child is going to build in the experience of being calmed by the mother, so that when upset, that the mother's face and voice automatically come to mind and provide calming.
Now that really makes me wonder, is there a distinction between, or is there a correlation between people that flew when they were little with their parents? Do they suffer less from the fear of flying?
I don't think it's about flying. I think it's just about your toy getting broken or having
Yeah.
and being comforted by the things that happen to a little kid, that when the kid is upset, they get responded to. So they expect things to work out okay, versus a child who is not consistently responded to and doesn't know if things are going to work out okay. This really comes to that theory of secure attachment versus insecure attachment. About 60% of us were securely attached as kids, and about 40% of us weren't. And as I see it, you've got to be securely attached to build in these psychological processes that will just quickly and automatically calm you when you get a shot of stress from.
That's so interesting. It feels like a therapy session where in the end, everything does come back to childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of it does, I think. A lot of us get our ability to regulate ourselves in early childhood, and some of us don't. I sometimes answer questions online, and I ran across a question that was intriguing. The person was writing, why is it when something unexpected happens, I feel this little blip? I wouldn't really call it fear. It's just this kind of blip that happens and then it goes away. And I wrote back that that's your mind working exactly as it should. When the stress hormones are released, the amygdala's picked up something that it thinks could be a problem. It might be accurate, it might not be, but better safe than sorry. The amygdala is going to give you a shot of stress hormones to make you feel a certain amount of alarm. And if you're concentrating on something, it needs to be enough stress hormones and a strong enough alarm to pull your attention away from whatever you're focusing on and make you say, wait a minute, what's going on here? So that you can see if there's a danger that you need to attend to that you might have not noticed because you're focusing on some task. So as soon as you get that feeling of alarm, that feeling of alarm needs to be down-regulated from alarm to something of maybe you could think of curiosity instead of, oh my God, what's going on, to, gee, I wonder what just happened that I got zapped about. Because if you stay at that alarm level, you can't think clearly. There's too much arousal for your brain to work in a problem-solving way. Your brain can do things that you've practiced repeatedly, things that you've memorized to do automatically. It can do those when you're highly stressed, but it can't say, let me analyze the situation and see what my options are. For you to analyze the situation and see what your options are, you need to calm down some to a level of curiosity. And the parasympathetic nervous system can do that. And I think it can do that if the person is securely attached and is used to finding that when they get upset, they quickly are calmed by their parent, the caregiver. So that gets built in to be a program. And then their adult life, as soon as something unexpected happens, they have this little blip, as the person said, and they immediately are relatively okay as they figure out what's going on. But others, when they get that blip, it's not just a momentary blip. It's a state of alarm that continues for about 90 seconds or so until the stress hormones burn off. So if you're a person who stays alarmed for a minute and a half once you get a shot of stress hormones, you say to yourself, perhaps, I'm not really very good at calming down. So what do I need to do? I need to be sure that I'm in charge of everything that happens, so I make sure nothing happens to upset me. And if I can't do that, I shouldn't be involved with it. I should avoid those situations, or at least have a way to escape. And then here comes the airplane. I don't have control of the plane. I don't have escape. Oh my goodness, I can't deal with that. Or I might have a panic attack, particularly if it's turbulent.
Wow. By the way, I also love how scientific this episode is turning out. This makes me really happy.
Me too. I love this. This is so interesting.
Well, Stephen Porges discovered this business about how the parasympathetic nervous system is activated, kind of stumbled on it by accident. He was doing some pretty scientific research on the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body. It's the one that, when activated, slows the heart rate, slows the breathing rate, relaxes the gut. And he was doing the research because a premature child's vagus nerve is not well developed, and it could well, I'm not, I shouldn't say overreact. It just may not work properly, and it might cause sudden infant death syndrome. So he was speculating that if he could test how much variation in heart rate activation of the vagus nerve caused, then he could perhaps use that as an indication of how well developed the vagus nerve was. So I'm assuming this was back when he was in grad school, and he had some of his subjects, the students, hooked up to his equipment that would check their heart rate virtually instantly. And the idea was the way you can test the vagus nerve is when you breathe out. Well, let's say you breathe in, you got a new supply of oxygen in the brain, so the heart needs to go at about 80 beats per minute to transport that oxygenated blood. But then you breathe out. Well, the heart doesn't need to keep working that hard. So the vagus nerve is stimulated, and it causes the heart rate to go from about 80 beats per minute down to about 60 while you're breathing out. Then when you breathe back in, now got a new supply, we got to transport it, the heart goes up to 80 again. So this variation, he calls it heart rate variability, he felt would be an indicator of how well developed the vagus nerve, which is causing that change, is. And he was getting the results he was expecting, but he got an unexpected result. When a friend of one of the subjects hooked up to his equipment walked by, their heart rate went down. He thought, what's going on here? And so he started looking into it. And that's how he stumbled on this thing, that when we're with a person who is truly safe emotionally as well as physically to be with, their face and their voice quality activate the parasympathetic nervous system, stimulate the vagus nerve, and calm us.
That's fascinating.
Yes.
That's so interesting. So even sometimes just being with your friend without doing anything else aside will help.
Yeah, and along that line, Alan Shore is another neurological researcher who's written a book called The Science of the Art of Psychotherapy. He says that what happens in the therapy session is that you as a therapist, your job is to be that emotionally safe, physically safe person, someone who is not judgmental, not critical, and not even advising, because once again, that puts you in a one-up position. So when the client is with you, your presence has a calming effect enough that they can now dig deeper into their emotional difficulties and start thinking and talking and feeling about things which they might not be able to do if they were not having that calming experience coming from your presence. And then the idea is that once you have re-experienced those difficult things in therapy, in the presence of the therapist, the presence of the therapist is linked to them. So now you can deal with them better outside the therapy session. The other thing that may be of interest is that so far I've explained how we can provide calming in situations in the airplane. We could also do it on the ground. Let's say, for example, an exercise that could be used by your listeners in their day-to-day living is first find someone who is easygoing. Oftentimes people say, well, I'm going to use my significant other. And I say, well, I'm married to, so I'm not sure that's a good person to use. We need someone who accepts you totally. I know they accepted you totally when you got engaged or married, but let's change it. So maybe you should find a casual friend, someone that you know from business or just socially, who, when you're with them, you really don't have to be on guard. Now, for the next few days, be on guard for getting revved up. Instead of trying to keep it out of mind, go ahead and look for it so that you can pick it up at the lowest possible level. So as soon as you realize that some stress hormones just got released, stop, look up, and find a door somewhere in the room and pretend that that door is opening. Your friend is coming in and you see their face. They see you and they say hello to you however they would. And maybe they come over and give you a hug. So you have at least face and voice. And if you have the kind of relationship that would give you a hug, that helps too. But the hug probably has more to do with oxytocin, and that was what I wanted to just mention. Originally, when I started doing this exercise years ago, I was thinking of something that had been invented called thought stopping, where you put a rubber band on your wrist. Every time you think a negative thought, you snap it and cause yourself some pain. Jerry Lynn Ross, a therapist in Washington, D.C., came up with this. And I thought, well, it makes sense, but I just don't like that idea of self-inflicted pain. what about instead of shifting a negative thought to the feeling of pain, what if we could shift a negative thought to a positive thought? So I was thinking, let's try something we could call thought redirection, automatic thought redirection. So I had a person I was working with up at the Hartford airport down in the baggage claim area. And so I asked, what's some kind of big deal experience, something that's fairly powerful experience that you've had that we can say every time you think of flying, you can shift to that? She said, well, I run marathons. I said, okay, let's use that. That's impressive. I can't imagine how anybody could run that far, but you can do it. So let's go for that. Let's say, I want you to stand right there. And every time I give you this hand signal, I want you to actually take yourself back to the marathon vividly. Actually, I want you to step, pretending you're running the marathon. So I would say, okay, the plane's taxiing out. Give her the signal. She would go from taxi in their mind to the marathon, not just mentally, but physically. Then, okay, the plane's rolling down the runway for takeoff. And we went through the whole flight like that. She got good results, but this was really hit or miss. It wasn't reliable, this method. And then I had a woman who said, I'm going to link it to nursing my child. And I thought to myself, you've got to be crazy. You're going to get on the plane and think you're never going to see the kid again. She called back a week later, absolutely perfect flight. I couldn't understand it, but it happened again after a few weeks. After it happened a few times, I realized something is going on where linking flying to nursing just fixes it. So I looked into it and I found Sue Carter, big expert on oxytocin here in the US, big researcher on that, had found that when a mother nurses, she produces a massive amount of oxytocin. And when oxytocin is produced, you've probably heard that it causes feelings of bonding, but it also shuts down the fear system. So what happens is when the mother sits down to nurse a child, it's going to take quite a long time, 30, 40 minutes maybe. Meanwhile, being a new mom, she's overwhelmed with things to do. Now she's got to just sit and let those things sit at the same time. That's not easy to do. So without any intervention by nature, after 5 or 10 minutes, the mother might think, I can't take this anymore. I got to stop nursing the kid and go clean the house or go shopping or something. So nature protects the child's interest this way. When the mother starts to nurse, she produces a massive amount of oxytocin. All the time she nurses, she continues to produce oxytocin. So she can still have the thought, I've got so much stuff to do, but it's like, I don't care because there's no push behind. So this was a great thing for us to be able to say, let's link being on the airplane to a memory of a time when you produced this very protective against anxiety hormone. Nursing is not something that works for everybody, right? So what do we do? What are some of the other situations? Well, it turns out that when we hold a newborn child, again, we get oxytocin, not to shut the fear system down, but to cause bonding, to make us feel protective of the child. This next piece of information may make a big difference in your romantic life. When males have an orgasm, they produce a massive amount of oxytocin. Why? Well, this activity could cause a child. So nature has kind of figured it out that let's see if we can cause some bonding here for the male so that he sticks around in case there's a child born. And now there's two people to take care of the child rather than one. But because the oxytocin blast is massive, the guy gets relaxed and falls asleep and you get annoyed. So if you can realize nature's trying to help things out here, then that may be useful. Females, on the other hand, no, oxytocin is not produced there. Oxytocin is produced during good chemistry, during foreplay. Not necessarily good for everyone, because you could be having good sexual chemistry with someone you should not be getting involved with. But nature then, as soon as the chemistry is there, it's like, okay, I have no fear of getting sexually involved with you. Nature doesn't care whether we live happily ever after. It just wants us to reproduce. If you look at biology, it's everywhere that way. So I can't understand why it happens with dogs, but for some reason, when we interact with dogs, there's actually been research that we produce oxytocin. That was the first research. And then a couple of years later, they found that when we interact with dogs, they release oxytocin also. And then the last one I know of is when you get a solid chest-to-chest hug, that produces oxytocin. So for example, you could imagine the chest-to-chest hug and looking over the person's shoulder who you're hugging with. There's a picture on the wall of a plane rolling down the runway, or a plane in turbulence, or a plane just boarding the plane. So if we take those things that are going to happen on the flight and link them one by one to a memory of producing oxytocin on one day during the exercise, on the next day, link it to a friend's face and voice and possibly touch, we've got a double-barreled approach to keeping these feelings under control. And I was getting once in a while a comment from a client that, yes, they are not panicking on the airplane, but, oh yeah, I don't panic in elevators anymore either, or in MRIs. It turned out that even though we had done nothing to try to reduce panic in these on the ground situations, focusing only in the flight situations, it was generalizing. So I sent out an email to people who had done, as I mentioned, we have several levels of courses. At the highest level course, 94% of the people said that they no longer panicked on the airplane or on the ground. And I thought, well, that's pretty good, but I was focused on flying. I didn't think about trying to do something about bridges and tunnels and elevators and MRIs. But I thought, well, let's see how good because cognitive therapy is they said it's gold standard treatment. Well, it turns out that yes, in the sense, cognitive therapy, you can get response in over half the cases where you apply cognitive therapy, but it only stops panic in about 16% of the people who get 8 sessions of it. And we were doing 94% without trying. So that's why I decided, okay, I'll write a book that takes the same techniques we use on the airplane and apply it to bridges and tunnels and elevators and social situations and driving and MRIs. So that book is out. It's called Panic Free.
That's great. One of the last questions that we have for you, what advice would you have for any potential traveler, outside of, what we've already discussed? What advice would you just offer somebody who was flying for the first time and they were nervous, not necessarily at the level of panic, like what you would deal with during your program, but just somebody who generally is more nervous to fly? What advice would you offer them to help them get through that flight?
Well, there's one really easy exercise that has gotten a lot of good feedback, and it's called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. It's an exercise that was started originally as a insomnia cure in neurolinguistic programming, and we kind of adopted it for flying. And the idea is that since when you get a shot of stress hormones, you're now, if you don't have good response by the calming system, you're going to be revved up for about 90 seconds, maybe a feeling of alarm. And while you're alarmed, you might start thinking more anxiety-producing thoughts and causing more stress hormones. So instead of being calm after 90 seconds, you might just continue to be stressed for an extended period of time. So the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise is just a mental game to play, see what's there, and you make 5 statements about what you see. Like, I see the computer, I see a mouse, I see a microphone, I see a telephone, I see a pen. And then you switch to 5 things that you hear. I hear the sound of my own voice. I hear the computer fan. I hear my chair squeaking, and then I run out of things. So I just repeat a couple more things. I hear the sound of my own voice. I hear the chair squeaking. And then touch. I feel my left arm on the left armrest. I feel my right arm on the right armrest. I feel a little itch on the right side of my head. I feel my butt in the chair. I feel my feet on the floor. So it takes a lot of concentration just to do that. And you're not thinking about anxiety-producing thoughts. Now, if you continued doing 5, 5, 5, you probably could get into a groove where you could do it and start thinking an anxiety-producing thought. So after you do 5 things you see, 5 things you hear, 5 things you touch, you switch to doing 4 things you see, 4 things you hear, 4 things you touch, and then you do 3 of each and 2 of each and then 1 of each. And this exercise, as I said, started out as an insomnia cure. It'll put you to sleep. So it certainly can take care of getting you calmed down in about 90 seconds. The question now is, after you've calmed down, do you go back to the anxiety-producing thought that you started out with, or do you figure you can come up with something better to do after you've calmed down? I've
actually used that technique before as well. Yeah. Not with, I I have anxiety, not with flying, just general anxiety. And I've used that before, and it really, it does help.
Yeah. Okay. There's another little trick that people can use for the toughest thing probably when flying is turbulence. If you go with a friend to some stairs the day before your flight, you can temporarily get the amygdala to think of the feeling of falling as fun rather than danger. So go to some stairs with a friend, step up off the floor to the first step and turn around. So both of you are on the same step, side by side. And you put your arms around each other so you're embraced side by side. And then on a count of 3, jump from the stair down to the floor, about 7 inches. You'll be in midair in free fall for about 1/10 of a second. The amygdala, plenty of time for the amygdala to react. But in this case, the amygdala is going to say, if it could talk, oh, come on, you can't kid me. This isn't danger. This is fun. I like it. How do I know it's fun? Not something that I should worry about, because you got your arms around each other. So do it again. I like it. So if you do it a few times, you can get the amygdala switched over temporarily to think that the things you're going to run into on the flight in terms of dropping are not going to bother you.
Tricking your brain.
That's amazing.
Another thing that can be helpful too is, since you have to give up control, see if you can meet the person who's going to have the control. Who would think of going to a hospital and saying, no, I don't want to meet the doctor. I'm here for my operation. Just do it. Yeah, that's what we do at the airport. We say, no, I don't want to meet the captain. Just lock me in here without control and send me off. But if you can meet the person who you have to give up control to, and you make that personal contact, then when these thoughts arise, due to noises and motions of the plane during the flight, you can picture Jane or Jack up there in the cockpit, the person you met, who's going to be able to handle it for you.
Those are all great ideas.
The way you can do that, of course, sometimes you can meet the pilots before you board. They come through the boarding area. But if not, ask the person who's in charge of the boarding area to let you get on the plane early. Tell them you're an anxious flyer. You'd like to get on early so you can ask if it's possible to meet the captain on board. Then you know the drill. When you get on the plane, the flight attendant's going to be looking at your seat assignment and point you towards your seat. But don't go there. Step aside and look for a different flight attendant, someone who's not busy with that greeting job, and ask them to go up to the cockpit and ask the captain if you can come up.
I like that. So the last thing we'll do is we'll ask, where our listeners can find you online. You can give your any websites, any resources, and we also will put them in our episode description. And then we'll do a quick conclusion and we'll stop recording.
My website is fearofflying.com. That's easy to remember. I've also done a book on fear of flying, which is called SOAR, the Breakthrough Treatment for Fear of Flying. And then for one with panic and anxiety in other situations than flying, a book called Panic Free. Every Wednesday night, we do a free Zoom counseling session. And you can find that if you go to the website and look under the talk and read section, and you'll find chat. And we have an hour of chat, and then we have an hour of Zoom session, which is really, really nice because you find there's a couple of dozen people there who feel the same way you do. You're not so unusual to have this feeling of not liking being on the plane.
Perfect. And again, listeners, we will link all of these resources in the episode description. So if you want to access that website, maybe access those weekly Zoom talks, or have access to the books that Captain Tom is talking about, just check out our episode description and we'll have everything there for you.
Thank you so much for coming on.
This was so informative. I've learned more in the past, I don't know, what have we, 45 minutes, hour that we've been on here, than I don't even know.
I think that's really, thank you for helping get the word out, because cognitive was very impressive when it came out. I thought that was going to be the answer, but it just didn't help that much for fear of flying. So I just had to keep messing around till coming up with something that was working. And generally, when I found something that was working, I didn't know why. It just took a while to figure it out.
That's all for this episode. If you'd like more Away She Goes in your life, make sure to stop by heradventures.com/podcast. That's where you can fill out a form if you're interested in being a guest on the show. And you can also write to us at awayshegosgwt@gmail.com or leave us a message on our Google voicemail from any phone or computer at 1-563-503-6323. To follow our adventures, you can follow me on Instagram at Carly Sees the World. Carly is spelled Carli.
You can also follow me at Sophia AEZ. Sophia is spelled Sophia. Away She Goes is part of Her Adventures, a community dedicated to radically redefining travel to be inclusive, sustainable, and empowering. You can learn more about Her Adventures, find travel tips and support, shop travel-themed items made by our members, and join our Facebook group with nearly 100,000 women all around the world. All at heradventures.com. We can't wait to connect and explore with you. Away she goes.